Alright guys, it's Simon here. We're playing Assassin's Creed 2 and I think now is a good time for an architecture tour of the Arsenal of Venice. Not this wooden plank thing, but this thing here. So there's the gate, right? There's the gate for the ships. And then there's the gate for people. And then there's like a little canal out here, even though this is not right. But I'll show you later on in Google Maps why this is not quite right. So the arsenal is back inside here. I wonder if I should go inside this thing, because it's not really all that interesting outside here. Let's just walk in a little bit. So the statues... Actually, let's just kind of stand in front of the gate for a little bit. Yeah, let's just stand in front of the gate for a little bit, and we'll read what the game has to say about this, first of all. So secret locations, Arsenale di Venezia. First built as a naval depot for private ships, the arsenal was rebuilt and enlarged in 1320. From that point on, it was used by the Venetian state to construct and maintain its ships. Famously, at the peak of production, shipbuilders were able to produce an entire ship in a day. The impressive front gate, the Porta Magna, the Great Gate, went up in 1460 in the classical revivalist style. It looks like Silvio Barbarigo was not the first Templar to control the arsenal. According to my research, the 1320 renovation was paid for with Templar funds and they seem to have established the base there ever since. Well, that second paragraph is fictional, but the first paragraph is pretty much right. So it's a massive naval yard building warships, basically. And in the game... So that's actually, I'm going to zoom out. Whoa, we can see the whole of Italy. I didn't know that. Alright, so can we zoom back in? Alright, let's go. Can we go back in? There. So there's Venice. There's the canal going around there. There's San Marco, and then there's the arsenal here. And the gate is right here. So we're standing here, right? The gate is there. And then there's like a canal there leading to the gate of the arsenal. And then there's another gate here. See these ships? There's that ship there and that ship there. They're kind of going out that way. So there's another gate there, which is a bit odd. Alright. So, actually no, I need to pause the game there. So, in real life, let's see, this is Google Maps. In real life, Venice looks like that. It's not quite a square. And the arsenal, you see how this part of the arsenal... That's the arsenal there. So you can see how massive this shipyard is compared to the rest of the city, right? Like even San Marco is like this big. And then the arsenal is like, what, 6 times, 8 times as big? So this thing is massive, right? This is massive. And let's see, so we're right here. If we zoom in fact we can zoom in far enough to see the gate. That's amazing. So we're in game, we're standing right here in front of that, and there's supposed to be a gate here, but there isn't. And these bridges, because this is where the ships are supposed to go in and out of the arsenal, this bridge I think can actually be raised. I'm not sure, maybe I'm wrong. Let me just check. Actually no, this bridge is not movable, but never mind. So the ships can't really, or tall ships can't get into the arsenal from there. But the tall ships can get in from the other side, right? So here, the other gate, it kind of opens up into... almost directly into the lagoon. Almost. So you see how this massive entryway here. So the shape of the island in game is not quite the same as the shape of the island in real life, but... so there's like a lot of kind of warehouses and then shipbuilding facilities around a central open water sort of area. So that's how it looks in real life. And you know, in real life there's the gate there and then whatnot, and we're standing there in game. So, you know, it looks pretty much... well, it's vaguely like how it is in real life in game. Not quite the same, but they've got some key elements that they've reproduced. Alright, so let's go read the Wikipedia article. It says here, the Venetian arsenal, Italian Arsenale di Venezia, was a complex of state-owned shipyards and armories clustered together in Venice in northern Italy. It was responsible for the bulk of Venice's naval power, during the middle part of the 2nd millennium AD. It was one of the earliest large-scale industrial enterprises in history. So overview. Construction of the arsenal began around 1104 during Venice's Republican era. It became the largest industrial complex in Europe prior to the Industrial Revolution, spanning an area of about 45 hectares or 110 acres, or about 15% of Venice. This is massive. Surrounded by a 2-mile, 3.2-kilometer rampart. Laborers and shipbuilders regularly worked within the arsenal, building ships that sailed from the city's port. With high walls shielding the arsenal from public view and guards protecting its perimeter, different areas of the arsenal each produced a particular prefabricated ship part, or other maritime implements such as munitions, rope, and rigging. These parts could then be assembled into a ship in as little as a day. An exclusive forest owned by the Arsenal Navy in the Montello Hills part of the Veneto provided the arsenal's wood supply. The arsenal produced the majority of Venice's maritime trading vessels, which generated much of the city's economic wealth and power, lasting until the fall of the Republic to Napoleon's conquest of the area in 1797. It is located in the Castello district of Venice. It is now owned by the state. So that pretty much sums it up. So Venice relied on its maritime trading vessels, and of course warships to protect the trading vessels. And they get built in the arsenal. So the arsenal is basically the source of Venice's power, you might say. The Byzantine-style establishment may have existed as early as the 8th century, though the present structure is usually said to have been begun in 1104 during the reign of Odoflofo Faliero. Although there's no evidence for such a precise date, it definitely existed by the early 13th century. Initially, the state dockyard worked merely to maintain privately built naval ships, but in 1320 the Arsenale Nuovo, Italian for new arsenal, was built, much larger than the original. It enabled all the state's navy and the larger merchant ships to be both constructed and maintained in one place. The arsenal incidentally became an important center for rope manufacture, and housing for the arsenal workers grew up outside its walls. So as we run around in the game, you might have noticed that around here the buildings seem to be kind of poor, or it's not, the area doesn't seem as wealthy as the other parts of Venice. So basically the people who work in the shipyards lived here. Let's see, so the parts, like these parts of Venice, around here, it's not like the palazzos around the Grand Canal here, whereas the stuff around here is really wealthy. You can see the bigger buildings, in fact. See the smaller buildings here, there's bigger buildings here, and bigger buildings around there. There's like a train station here, by the way. This is obviously built later on. There's no trains in the Renaissance. You can see the different sizes of the buildings, and that kind of indicates the different levels of wealth amongst the people who live there. So the people around here are fairly poor. They're kind of laborers who work in the arsenal, as it were. Venice developed methods of mass-producing warships in the arsenal, including the frame-first system to replace the Roman hull-first practice. This new system was much faster and required less wood. At the peak of its efficiency in the early 16th century, the arsenal employed some 16,000 people, who apparently were able to produce nearly one ship each day and could fit out, arm, and provision a newly built galley with standardized parts on a production line basis not seen again until the Industrial Revolution. The staff of the arsenal also developed new firearms at an early date, beginning with bombards in the 1370s. That's really early for cannons. And numerous small arms were used against the Genoese a few years later. That's really early for firearms. The muzzle velocity of handguns was improved beyond that of the crossbow, creating armor-piercing rounds. Arsenal-produced arms were also noteworthy for their multi-purpose utility. The Venetian condottieri leader Bartolomeo Colleoni is usually given credit as being the first to mount the arsenal's new lighter-weight artillery on mobile carriages for field use. So it became a foundry for cannon building as well. That's amazing. I mean, the thing is, like, when you have a lot of, skilled craftspeople, I guess these are, engineers, you might even call them at this point. Like, if you have one guy working in a workshop, you can't do very much. But when you have 16,000 people kind of concentrated in the same place, building ships and other weapons of war, it turns into a sort of, you don't just make weapons anymore. You also start inventing and building new weapons because you have enough people doing the same thing at the same time for people to, for these new ideas to work. I don't know if I'm making sense. Like, if you're one guy working alone, you can't achieve very much. But you have 16,000 people in the same place, somebody's going to have a good idea somewhere, right? And so, having a lot of people together, and that's the power of cities too. It's not just the idea of having a lot of people and a lot of manpower, but a lot of brain power as well. So it's not so the power of the arsenal is not just in its size. It's also in the fact that it becomes like an incubator for new military technology because there's so many people working on this stuff together. The arsenal's main gate, the Porta Magna, was built around 1460 and was the first classical revival structure built in Venice. It was perhaps built by Antonio Gambello from a design by Jacopo Bellini. Two lines taken from Greece situated beside it were added in 1687. One of the lines, known as the Piraeus lion, has runic defacements carved in it by invading Scandinavian mercenaries during the 11th century. It's got graffiti carved into it by Scandinavian mercenaries. And apparently the graffiti is still there. In the late 16th century, the arsenal's designers experimented with larger ships as platforms for heavy naval guns. The largest was the Gallias, already used in the Battle of Lepanto against the Ottoman Turks, and developed from the old merchanting Great Galley. It was huge, propelled by both sails and oars, with guns mounted on wheeled carriages along the sides in the modern fashion. And by modern they mean later warships, like the ships of the Lion in the later imperial eras. It was slow and unwieldy in battle, however, and few were ever built. The galleon, also developed at the arsenal, was an armed sailing ship, a slimmer version of the merchant round ship. It was useful in major naval battles, but not in the small bays and off the extensive lee shores of the Dalmatian coast, which is where the Venetians had their power. So it was useful in open seas, but not, along the coastline, because it's too big. Now, significant parts of the arsenal were destroyed under Napoleonic rule and later rebuilt to enable the arsenal's present use as a naval base. It is also used as a research center, an exhibition venue during the Venice Biennale, and is home to a historic boat preservation center. So it's still used for boat building in a way. Mass production. The Venetian arsenal's ability to mass-produce galleys on an almost assembly line process was unique for its time and resulted in possibly the single largest industrial complex in Europe prior to the Industrial Revolution. Indeed, even Dante himself was impressed by the arsenal, who found it inspiring enough to include it in his Inferno. As in the arsenal of the Venetian spoils... This is translated from Italian, by the way, so it doesn't really rhyme, I don't think. Boils in winter the tenacious pitch, to smear the unsound vessels over again, for sail they cannot, and instead thereof one makes his vessel new, and one recalks the ribs of that which many a voyage has made. One hammers at the prow, one at the stern. This one makes oars, and that one cordage twists. Another mends the mainsail and the mizzen. So he's talking about how there's a lot of people working on this one ship. So this mass production process where you have a lot of people each working on a single part. And the efficiency of mass production is that, because each person only does a few things, like each person becomes very, very skilled at doing that one thing. Like you do one thing over and over again, you get good at it. Whereas if you try to do 100 different things at the same time, you can't really focus on it, right? So the mass production allowed, Venice a certain economy of scale in building their warships, and that was the source of their power. The arsenal's capacity for production was rare in a time when most of Europe had no manufacturing abilities more efficient than the guild system. The slow and tradition-bound way craftsmen had of passing on skills to their sons or apprentices, while monopolizing production and sale of craft pieces in a given region. The arsenal was something different, a harbinger of future times. That it was. The Venetian arsenal was not the mass production facility that it was to be until about 1320, with the creation of the Arsenale di Nouveau, the new arsenal. The Arsenale di Nouveau was simply a larger and more efficient version of the original. Prior to this time, the arsenal had served mainly as a place to maintain privately built ships. With the creation of the Arsenale di Nouveau and the development and introduction of the Great Galley, the Venetian arsenal would start to take on its industrial form. The invention of the Great Galley itself is significant because they were able to build frame first. This process used less timber than the earlier hull first building system, resulting in much faster build times. This was crucial to the process that would lead to the arsenal becoming a mass production center. By the 16th century, the arsenal had become the most powerful and efficient shipbuilding enterprise in the world. Not only did it supply ships, rigging, and other nautical supplies, it was also a major munitions depot for the Venetian navy, and was capable of outfitting and producing fully equipped merchant or naval vessels at the rate of one per day. So you don't actually build the whole ship in one day, but the idea is that there's a production line going on. So, there's multiple ships being built in the arsenal at the same time, and then every day one ship will be finished. Like the ship might have been started, several weeks or even months beforehand, but there's so many ships kind of going through this production line that every day a ship will be popped out at the end of the production line. That's what it means. It's not like they start the ship and then finish it on the same day. That's crazy, right? In the rest of Europe, the production of a similar-sized vessel could often take months. This large production capacity was a result of the massive number of people that the arsenal employed, almost 16,000, and the streamlining of production within the arsenal itself. Production was divided into three main stages: framing, planking, and cabins. Framing, planking and cabins, and final assembly. Each stage employed its own workers who specialized in that particular stage of production, as well as using standardized parts to produce an almost assembly line process. The arsenal often kept up to 100 gullies in different stages of production and maintenance. That way, once a galley was launched, another could immediately be immediately put into the finishing stages of production. Alright, so there's, at any one time, there could be up to 100 ships being produced, and so one per day comes out. So, 100 ships, one per day. So I guess it takes about 3 months to build the whole thing if there's 100 ships going on at the same time and one comes out every day. About 3 months, maybe 2.5 or 3 months, or maybe 4 months. They might be exaggerating a little bit. It could still take 6 months to build the ship, probably less. Probably like 4 or 5 months to build a ship. Probably not. I don't know. I feel like they might have exaggerated a little bit. Maybe not quite one a day. But what I'm trying to say is, building the ship still took months, as it takes months in other parts of Europe. But the fact is that they have such a big factory going on that every day a ship is finished, is what it means. The layout of the arsenal itself was modified to enable minimal handling of materials during the stages of production. The arsenal also saw the use of standardized interchangeable parts, and that's important too in terms of mass production. Minimal handling of materials during stages of production. What it basically means is that the raw materials are put close to where they're used, as such, or the parts are put close to where they're used. So you're not spending a lot of time moving stuff around different parts of the arsenal. Like, you make the parts and then you assemble it right there, and then you move the ship along to the next warehouse, and then they put in their parts. So it's just kind of to minimize the amount of time materials are moved around, which increases efficiency. And the use of standardized interchangeable parts, that's important too, because with standardized parts you don't have to worry about making a part for a particular ship. Like, you just make a part and then assemble it together, and then all the ships are the same. That's how factories work. The idea that you have interchangeable parts. Like before the Industrial Revolution, and I guess with the exception of the Venetian Arsenale, like if every single thing is like, imagine you're a clockmaker. If every single clock you make is different, you basically have to design each clock from scratch, which is it's a bit of work. Whereas if you make the same clock all the time, then you don't have to redesign anything. You just you design it once and you just keep making it. And if you're creating parts for that clock, you don't have to create unique and different parts for every clock. You just make 10 of the same parts, and then you just assemble them together, and then they're all the same clock. It's just a lot more efficient to have this standardization and interchangeability. But it also means that every single one of your clocks is exactly the same, or almost exactly the same. Which for warships, that's fine. I don't think that's a problem for warships. For consumer goods, people might want something more unique, right? But you're building ships, so it doesn't really matter. One revolutionary aspect of the arsenal was its employment of the moving assembly line. The galleys, through the use of a canal, were moved along during their stages of construction, allowing them to be brought to the materials and workers, instead of the materials and workers going to the galley itself. This assembly approach was repeated in the rest of the world only starting from the early 20th century when Henry Ford introduced the modern assembly line. Well, there you go. So, Galileo and the Arsenal. In 1593, Galileo became a consultant to the Arsenal, advising military engineers and instrument makers, and helping to solve shipbuilders' problems, many of them relating to matters of ballistics. This is 1593, so that's sometime after the game. He was also responsible for creating some major innovations in the production and logistics of the arsenal. As a result of his interactions with the arsenal, Galileo published a book later in his life addressing a new field of modern science that concerned with the strength and resistance of materials. This science largely saw its roots in the knowledge of the shipwrights of the Venetian arsenal. It is also supposed that Galileo's initial visits to the arsenal were as a result of his initiative to further investigate Aristotle's questions concerning shipbuilding and navigation, found in the mechanical questions of Aristotle. As a result of these investigations, which were pursued by observing the work of the shipwrights, Galileo was asked to help in resolving a specific problem with the rowing units of the galleys. As a result of his studies of Aristotle, and in particular question 4 regarding propulsion of ships by oar, Galileo was able to produce a response to the question and ended up becoming a major source of information for the shipbuilders of the arsenal concerning matters of rowing, instruments, and ballistics. Not sure why that's important, but okay. Venice's naval power. Venice's wealth and power rested in its ability to control trade in the Mediterranean. Its ability to control trade in the Mediterranean. So a lot of money can be made in trade. Like you buy stuff from where it's abundant, and then you transport it to where it's rare. And so you buy cheap and sell expensive, and you have to transport it. And to transport it, you also need to protect the merchant vessels, because there's pirates and thieves and other empires wanting in on the trade. So there you go. So Venice's wealth and power rested in its ability to control trade in the Mediterranean. This would not have been possible without an extremely large navy and merchant force. By 1450, over 3,000 Venetian merchant ships were in operation, both as supply ships for Venetian merchants and as warships for the Venetian navy. The fleet required constant maintenance and outfitting. The Venetian arsenal was not only able to function as a major shipyard, but was also responsible for these routine maintenance stops that most Venetian galleys required. This required financing for which the Venetian government spent almost 10% of its revenues. So 10% of the Venetian government spending was on its military, on its navy, not even the military, not even the army, but just the navy. This naval power resulted in the dominance of the Mediterranean commerce. Venice's leading families, largely merchants and noblemen, were responsible for creating some of the grandest palaces and employing some of the most famous artists ever known. This opulence and wealth would not have been possible without the naval force constructed by the arsenal. With the creation of the Great Galley and the mass production capacity of the arsenal, the fleets of Venice were the basis for the greatest commercial power the European world had yet seen. So in this kind of relatively small city on an island, they built ships and they created a trading empire that was a source of that made Venice one of the wealthiest, city-states in Europe at that time.